Alright, now that we've imported all of our files and lined them up on the screen how we want, now all we have to do is attach some script to it so that it has some functionality and isn't just, you know, a cool looking decoration on the screen like these guys are. Alright, and another thing I want to show you before we get into scripting is right now we have our rainbow fill on, which is awesome. So woo, up and down. Looks good. But the other one that we had, here let's hide this one, was our white fill, the solid fill. And this is what I was talking about with having it white, because right now it's white, you know, it doesn't look anything too crazy. We'll make it the image type filled, and same the Radial 360, so it drains and fills just like our rainbow one. But if you're not feeling the white, you can make it any color you want, and this is what I mean by saving files. So instead of having like a pink fill, a blue fill, green, whatever, you can just change the color directly in Unity. Really useful. So anyway, I'm going to continue on with the rainbow one because I like how that one looks for now. And let's get some scripting started. So we'll go to the Radial interface. I'm just going to attach the script here. I'm pretty sure you can attach it anywhere. Some people like to put these kinds of things on game managers, but since this is my Radial interface and I'd like to be able to attach it in other scenes or other games or whatever, you might want to attach it on here so that you can drag it over and make a prefab out of it once we're all finished. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new script. I'm going to make this our Radial UI controller. There we go. And we want to edit that. Let's go edit our script. So this is the script that we're going to start with. I'll remove these because we don't need this. And one thing, anytime you're making a script for anything that interacts with UI elements, you want to put in the using Unity engine .ui. That way you have that library of classes to use when you're scripting behavior into UI elements. And one of the first things that we're going to do is we're going to list out all of these different image elements, and those are UI elements that we wouldn't be able to script properly without including the Unity engine.ui. So let's do that right now. We don't need this. Actually, we're going to need fixed update here in a minute, but not right now. So let's do that, and let's get our variables here that we're going to need. So we're going to do a public variable. We're going to do a public image, and I'm just going to name it all of the different layers that are going to be interactive. Like some of these are static, like the outline, the transparent fill, and the button shadow, so we don't need variables for those. Those are going to remain the same throughout gameplay. But the buttons that we'll be interacting with are the A, B, X, Y buttons and the bar fill itself. So right now I'm going to do a rainbow fill. So let's just make this the health fill. Health bar fill. And now we're going to list all the buttons. Always remember to start with lowercase. Alright, and copying and pasting is such a help here. And the A button and the B button. So we're going to assign these variables in the Unity interface, and we're going to make scripting that'll interact with them. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to want to do is assign variables in the start function, and there are a couple more variables that we want to make. So I want to make a public float. We're going to want our current health value, and we're going to want our max health value. And I'm gonna initialize it here. And remember, when you're initializing float variables, it's always a good idea to put an F after. That way, it's very clear to the very clear to the engine that we're using a float value and not an integer. Okay, so in the start, let's initialize these. Max health. We already have it listed there, but in here, we want current health. Right now it's equal to max health, and that's so when you start the level, your current health is the max health. You start with max health, and right now I'm going to assign the fill variable. So with some of these images, it takes into account the fill properties, which is really cool. So our rainbow fill has a value between 0 and 1. So at 1 it's full, at 0 it's empty. So this is going to be our health meter, so we want to start out with full health, which is a value of 1. So we want to initialize that right now. So we want, which variable is that assigned? So we want health bar fill dot fill amount, and this command right here, fill amount, right here is going to assign this variable, and we want it to be 1 so that the bar is full when we start the level. All right, and these button images here, let's save this real quick. So the button images right now, they're all activated. When you're not pressing a button in the game, you want it to start out like this, so that when the player presses the X button, it appears. You don't want these buttons showing up and being present the whole time during gameplay. So what we're going to do is set their value to false. So right now we want, I'm just going to copy and paste these real quick, that way we get the variable name right. Copying and pasting is really handy when you're scripting, that way you don't make any typos. So I definitely recommend, especially with a lot of different variables, just copy and paste and make sure that everything is kept the same, and make sure everything is nice and even and neat looking. It makes life a lot easier when you go back to debug. Okay, so enabled, we do not want this enabled, so we're going to set this to false. And we're going to do this for the rest of these. That way, when the scene loads, all of these button images will be hidden until the player hits a button. Okay, so now that we have all of our variables assigned, we want to make a function that basically reads when a player is hitting a button, and when that button is being pressed, we want our button image to show. So let's do that. So we're going to do void okay. And for naming methods, you want to use an uppercase as opposed to a lowercase like we do with our variables up here. All right, so I'm going to use an if statement. So basically, if we want, okay, and how we're going to do this is we're going to use the input, and we're going to use .getKey. And there's two options here. You can do getKey or getKey down. We're going to use getKey. That way, the whole time the button is pressed, the image will show. If you use getKey down, it just registers, oh, this button has been pressed, execute this thing once. And we want the image to show the entire time the button is being pressed, as opposed to just showing up when the button is pressed and staying there. So we're going to use getKey instead of getKey down. Hopefully that made sense. Okay, so getKey, and we want, which one do we want? GetKey, and we want key code. And we want joystick button too. So Xbox is labeled a little bit differently than the keyboard. With the keyboard, if you wanted the letter X, you would go keycode.x. For the Xbox, it's mapped a little bit differently, and the X button is joystick button too. So we're going to put that there. So this statement here says, if the player is pressing Xbox button X, then we want this image to show. And all we have to do for that is go X button, our variable up there, enabled, which is currently false, and now that the player is holding it, we want it to be true. So now ideally when the player hits the Xbox, X button will show up, or the X button for our interface. And I also want to do this for keyboard, so I'm going to copy this, make it an else. And then this one's really easy. So what's a good one for the X? We'll make it E. Okay. And else if no button is being pressed, then we want that button to disappear again. Like once the player presses the button once, we don't want the image to stay there for the rest of the gameplay. We want it to disappear again. That way it's a responsive UI. So right now, this is our first component of our responsive UI. Yay! All right, let's see if this works. Oh, you know what? I almost forgot something important. So this function by itself needs to be called. And anytime that you want something with accurate, real-time gameplay interaction, use fixed update. Same with anything that has anything to do with physics. Okay, so I'm going to do that, and that function is going to be called there. Let's see if this works. Okay, so I'm going to take this, go back into the Unity screen. Let's make sure that all of our variables are assigned. Okay, so we have nothing here. So the health bar fill, we're using the rainbow fill, so whoops. If you're doing something like this with a lot of image, sometimes it's nice to just lock it in place. That way if you click on something else, it doesn't take away what you're trying to do here over in the inspector. Okay, so I want to put our rainbow fill for the health bar. You can put a solid fill if you'd rather have a solid color. X button, X button. See how all these clear labels are coming in handy already? It makes life so much easier. Alright, ideally this will work out. I don't know, we'll see. And this is just for the X button right now. Check it out! Alright, so when we hit the X button, our X button image shows. Success, great. And let's quickly finish this script up for all the buttons real quick. Very easy. So one thing that I will save you guys a lot of time with is you could make a big long else if statement with all the different keys, but they won't interact properly. Some buttons will be prioritized above others, and then you won't see other buttons when you're pressing multiple buttons at the same time. So I finally found a workaround for this, and it's a little bit tedious, but it works pretty well for our purposes. So what I'm going to do here basically is I'm going to copy this whole function, make another function. So this is going to be responding to player input X. So we want player input X. So this is our X button. And now let's do this for our Y button. And we'll put a Y here. And instead of, we'll use Q, the keyboard, and instead of a joystick button 2, is a joystick button. I think it's joystick button 0. I'm pretty sure. I keep this internet page handy when I'm doing this because it shows you which button is which, so we're going to want 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so this is for Y button, so actually we are going to want the 3. No, not the 1, 3. Okay, so this should have the Y button show up. And actually, let's just need to activate our Y button function as well. And let's quickly finish this out for the rest of the buttons. And always make sure to change all the variables when you do this, because copying and pasting is great, but it can also cause a little bit of confusion if you forget to change the names of everything right away. Okay, and this is the A button. I'm pretty sure that's 0. 0. And for the A button, I guess we'll do Z. I'm not really using this game for keyboard too thoughtfully, but oh, you know what? F would probably be more comfortable to hit. Okay. Great. And just a side note too, if you want to get really technical, you could get fancy and have a whole other image that's the same size as your A button and just put the letter F there instead in Photoshop. You could go and put like the letter F here so that you have buttons that show up properly depending on which input the user is using, but for the sake of this video I'm just going to keep the images that we have for time's sake. Okay, so we have one button left. I think we need the B button. And if anybody knows of a more efficient way to map out the different buttons so that when all of them are pressed simultaneously, they show up properly, let me know, because I feel like this is a lot of different methods for a simple control script. I don't have two of those here. Why is that? Oh, we'll find out in a minute. Ooh, this might have something to do with it. This looks like a stray bracket. Let's get rid of that. Alright, so it looks like we probably need to put another bracket at the end. Oh, do we? Or do we? Okay. So I think all of the stray brackets are gone. Nope, now I need another bracket. Okay. Okay, so we have... I feel like I am constantly having bracket issues with Unity. Okay. No, that's not what we want. Oh, that's why. Okay. Don't want that. We actually want this. Ooh, I really don't like how those are all indented. Okay, well, for now, this should give us a fully functional script for the buttons. Let's check out what we got. Okay, so ideally now all the buttons will be responsive. Unless it's throwing an error. Oh. Ah. Need this, and I think that needs to go away. And that should wrap it up, I think. Let's try this now. Okay, so now that all of my brackets and semicolons are fixed, let's see if we can test this out. And I can't say this enough, test your script constantly while you're writing it. It'll save you so much time going back. Okay, so the B isn't responding. It shows up when I hit A. But, okay, that's weird. I know why I need to change this button at the bottom. Okay, so instead of that, we want control button 1, and that's why. Okay, and that's why it's so important to test constantly while you're doing scripting, just to catch little things like that. All right, so now we have a completely interactive button interface. Now all that's left is our dial. So ideally when you're making a game, you're going to have things that you run into that cause damage, enemies or things like that. For the sake of time, I just want to show you how to make the dial responsive. So let's go back into our code, and I'm just going to put in an invoke repeating to give us some damage. That way you can just see how the dial responds. So let's make a new function inside the main class brackets. So let's make this public void, because this is one that you're probably going to want to link to other scripts, like your main player script. Okay, and this script will do exactly what it says and deal damage to the character. So we want to take away 5 point values from the current health every time this function is called. For our purposes, I mean, you can change it later for enemies or whatever, but for demonstration purposes, every time this function is called, I want 5 value taken off the fill of our meter. And let's see, we're going to calculate our health here. So right now, this will subtract 5 from 100, our max health and current health, which is what we're starting out with. So we're now subtracting 5 from our 100 current health. And that's a problem because our radio meter here, our radial meter has a value between 0 and 1. So we need to convert that value. To do that, let's go back into our damage dealing script. Current health, and we're going to divide it by our max health so that our current health is displayed as a percentage rather than a full number. So basically, if our max health is 100 like it is, maybe our current health is 40 divided by 100 equals 0.4, so that would be the value of the fill. So 0.4 value here would be 0.4 value here. Hopefully that makes sense. So anyway, we're converting that to a decimal. That's helpful. And okay, so now we need to convert that value to the fill itself. So we need to translate this number into our rainbow fill variable. So let's do that right now. We're going to do health bar fill amount, and we are going to make that. All right. Okay, so hopefully that'll do what I want to do. And so right now, since we don't have any obstacles to run into or anything to inflict damage, I'm going to just do an invoke repeating call. So what this is going to do is call our deal damage function every X amount of seconds. Okay, so we're going to invoke deal damage, and we want to do it immediately upon the scene loading, and we want to do it every 1 second, is what that says basically. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, so ideally it'll start out full and then drain every 1 second. All right, cool. So it looks like that's working. Our buttons are responsive, and we're set to go. The script will be nice and easily modifiable if you want to script in any interactive damage dealing or health replenishing items.